he did actually produce a graphic at his press conference yesterday at which he tried to set out his aims. Now, obviously it was to remove Hamas from power, and then he talked about this new authority taking over. His bind that he's created for himself politically is he doesn't want to hand power to the Palestinian Authority, which is the part of Palestinian political life that recognises the two-state solution and has been Israel's partner on and off since 1993 in the peace process. He doesn't want to let them take over. That is the most logical solution, because he then sees, then the Palestinian Authority is in charge of West Bank and Gaza. The meaning of things like recognising a Palestinian state politically suddenly changes. Yeah. It becomes a more attainable thing. And of course, the Palestinian Authority has been saying, pretty much since this started, don't expect us to go in and clean up the mess in Gaza until you commit again to a two-state solution. Yeah, that's their price for going in.
Let's turn to the other endless war, which is, of course, in the Middle East. Australia has become the latest country to say it will recognise a Palestinian state at the UN next month. And meanwhile, 5 Al Jazeera journalists have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on Gaza. Israel's military admitted targeting Anas al-Sharif, a Palestinian reporter it called a terrorist, who it said posed as a journalist. There has been a strong sense, Mark, of Israel's increasing international isolation over the last couple of weeks, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's been clear for some time that Netanyahu, you can argue it's been clear since the beginning, having started a campaign in Gaza, really doesn't know how to end it, and he doesn't know how to set achievable objectives. Now, I think his people would turn around and say, what are you talking about? The objective is to destroy Hamas, to remove them from power. Would you expect us to leave an organisation that has promised to repeat the October the 7th atrocity in place on our borders? OK, we get that. But in terms of an achievable objective, for example, of degrading its military forces down to a certain level, as far as we understand, the Israeli military said in May of 2024 that they had already reached that point, that Hamas had been destroyed as a sort of conventional military threat to Israel. So, the question is, what is Netanyahu trying to achieve? And what's he been toying with these last few months when he decided in March to go back to war, to abandon a ceasefire agreement, in the hope that he could do better by fighting than by continuing to negotiate with Hamas. Now, clearly, first and foremost, he's trying to get the remaining hostages out, maybe 20 still alive. But he's also trying to dictate the shape that, we were just talking about in the Ukrainian context, after the guns fall silent.
Okay, but so
he's trying to dictate the shape of that. So a lot of people would argue, including, I think, to an extent, even the senior military in Israel, that he's trying to achieve something that's not possible.
But if he's trying to dictate the shape of that, that would suggest that he has some idea of what he wants the shape of that to be. Now, look, he's been talking in the last few days about the plan to take over Gaza City, create a security. He said they say to create a security zone with a civilian administration led by neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. What are they talking about? Who are these people? What is this new organisation that is supposedly... what does he want?
This has actually been around since the Biden administration.
Right.
I heard Jamie Rubin a few weeks ago talking on his podcast about how he was sent over to help try and negotiate this as a sort of diplomatic emissary for Biden. It's this idea that you can have this so-called council or authority of technocrats, of non-aligned experts in Gaza, who would take over power.
Of Palestinian technocrats?
Right. Of course. Yeah, Palestinians. Now, a lot of people think, no, it's unrealistic. If you leave Hamas in position and armed, they'll just start to intimidate those people. In fact, your very good and salient question, well, what on earth does Bibi want? Now he's going to be ordering the Israeli military to take life again on such a large scale. He did actually produce a graphic at his press conference yesterday at which he tried to set out his aims. Now, obviously it was to remove Hamas from power, and then he talked about this new authority taking over. His bind that he's created for himself politically is he doesn't want to hand power to the Palestinian Authority, which is the part of Palestinian political life that recognises the two-state solution and has been Israel's partner on and off since 1993 in the peace process. He doesn't want to let them take over. That is the most logical solution, because he then sees, then the Palestinian Authority is in charge of West Bank and Gaza. The meaning of things like recognising a Palestinian state politically suddenly changes, it becomes a more attainable thing. And of course, the Palestinian Authority has been saying, pretty much since this started, don't expect us to go in and clean up the mess in Gaza until you commit again to a two-state solution. Yeah, that's their price for going in. So that's all part of it. So Netanyahu has tried to say neither of the above. Neither Hamas nor the Palestinian Authority. We can have an internationally formed group of people. Now, curiously, and this aligns with things I've heard from Israeli securocrats and people in the last few weeks, he didn't put on his list banning Hamas as a political party. And the Israelis seem to accept that Hamas will continue to exist as a political party in Gaza.
Just not as a military force.
Correct, and not in charge. But of course, then the question is, if they still are at some level armed, will they not continue to intimidate? And there is an aspect of this which is not spoken about much by the Egyptians, the Qataris, the UAE, the people who in some ways have been trying to empower this whole thing and stop the killing, which is none of them are wild about the idea of Hamas being in power when all this stops either, because they're very fearful that if they make big investments to rebuild Gaza and Hamas rebuilds itself and rearms, then, at some point we'll be back to square one and there'll be another terrible episode between the Israelis and Hamas.
Finally on this, Mark, and I suppose it's going to have to be slightly briefly, but how significant is it, this sort of wave of international recognition of a Palestinian state? As I said, it's Australia latest, there's been France, it's been Britain. Does that really change, in the parlance of the region, the facts on the ground in any kind of way? Is it of major diplomatic import, or is it just sort of, Middle East noise?
I don't think it changes the facts on the ground. It is an answer to the millions of people who are angry about the lack of Western action against Israel. That's, I think, its prime political meaning in this country, in France and Canada. I think the one diplomatic bit of sense I've heard spoken about this step is that it's a way of trying to put down a marker and saying to Netanyahu, if you think what you can achieve with the end state in Gaza is a comprehensive breaking of the idea of the two-state solution, forget it. We're still committed to it.
Right.
And that's, I think, its prime diplomatic meaning.
And do you think, finally, that the relations between, for example, Britain and Israel have gone to a stage where it's going to be a long time before we speak about each other as nations in the manner that we used to?
Yeah. It'll be tricky, I think, in the coming months, assuming there's some kind of settlement, but clearly we're not there yet. Yeah,
Mark Urban, thank you very much indeed. You can, of course, read Mark in the Sunday Times, and he's here with us every Monday. Always absolutely fascinating. Great to have you as ever.